Hello and welcome to the second episode of A Closer Look on Uzbekistan. My name is Simona Grano and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Zurich as well as the director of the Taiwan Studies project here at the same university. Now I'd like to give you some introductory presentation on the country, Uzbekistan. First of all, some important facts. Uzbekistan, as you can see in the slide, is a landlocked country in the heart of Central Asia and borders on 5 nations: Kazakhstan to the northwest and the north, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to the east and southeast, Afghanistan to the south, and Turkmenistan to the southwest. The Autonomous Republic of Karakalpakstan is located in the western third of the country. Uzbekistan has a population of 34 million, with about half of its population living in urban areas. Uzbeks make up for more than 4/5 of the population, followed by Tajiks, Kazakhs, Tatars, Russians, and Karakalpaks. Now, most citizens of Uzbekistan claim Uzbek as their primary language, and about 1/3 of the population in Uzbekistan actually speaks Russian. Some parts of the country have been more Russified, while others have been less. Karakalpak, a distantly related Turkish language, enjoys official status alongside Uzbek in Karakalpakstan, where it is actually spoken by about 500,000 people. In terms of religion, about 3/4 of the population are Muslim. Uzbekistan's Human Development Index ranks 106 out of 189 countries. Just to have an idea, Uzbekistan ranks lower than, for example, Sri Lanka, which we covered in the first episode of the series, Russia and Kazakhstan, but higher than Kyrgyzstan. And for those of you who are not really familiar with the index, this actually Human Development Index is scores higher when the lifespan in a country is higher, the education level is higher, and the gross national income, GNI, is per capita is also higher. Let me say something now about geography. So Uzbekistan is a land of deserts and steppes, and the climate is arid continental. Most of the population in the country lives in the eastern part of the country, where the capital of Tashkent is also located. Much of Karakalpakstan, the autonomous republic in the west of Uzbekistan, is actually under threat of depopulation caused by the environmental poisoning of the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea was once the planet's 4th largest inland body of water, but is currently now shrunk to its about 10% of its regional surface area since the 1960s. The roots of this problem actually date back around 60 years, when the Soviet premier Nikita Khrushchev decided to industrialize agriculture across Central Asia despite its aridity. With supplying rivers being diverted to feed irrigation canals for wheat and cotton fields. Of course, we know that nowadays climate change has also intensified the scarcity of water and the problems in the area. Nowadays, Uzbekistan still ranks among the world's leading cotton producers, something we'll touch upon later on during the discussion, though the industry is fraught with controversy also due to forced labor issues. Uzbekistan is also known for its orchards and vineyards, and is actually important for raising karakul sheep and silkworm. Furthermore, Uzbekistan's mineral, oil, and gas reserves are substantial, and the country produces and exports a large volume of natural gas. As a general information, Uzbekistan is a lower middle income country according to the latest World Bank classification, with a GDP per capita of $1,724. Now, something about history. Well, the land that is currently part of Uzbekistan's territory was actually once at the heart of the ancient Silk Road trade route, connecting China with the Middle East and Rome. Nowadays, it forms part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, as indicated on the map, and as we shall also discuss later on with the 2 guests. The country spent most of the past 200 years as part of the Russian Empire and then of the Soviet Union, before emerging as an independent state when the Soviet rule ended in 1991. Under the authoritarian president, Islam Karimov, who ruled from 1989 until his death in 2016, he actually died in office, I think, Uzbekistan maintained a state-controlled economy. Now, Karimov was accused of stifling political opposition and actually also of sanctioning widespread human rights abuses in this country. Despite this kind of criticism, he actually became an ally of the United States after the 2001 September 11 attacks on US soil, and granted basing rights to US forces operating in Afghanistan in exchange for military and economic assistance. Karimov was also supported by the Russian government. After 2 decades of economic and political isolation under, of course, President Karimov, his successor, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, has made efforts to break Uzbekistan out of its international isolation and also out of its economic stagnation. There are hopes that the president's so-called quiet revolution will bring needed change to the country's society and economy. And we look forward to discuss that with our 2 speakers. Let me introduce them now. First of all, we have Dilfuza Kurolova. She is a human rights lawyer and founding curator of the Global Shapers Tashkent Hub, the youth initiative of the World Economic Forum. She is also part of the social development team of the World Bank on citizen engagement. And our second speaker for today, Dr. Farkhod Tolipov, is director of the non-governmental research institution Caravan of Knowledge in Tashkent. He also actually teaches at Webster University in Tashkent, and he specializes in geopolitics, regional security, and regional integration in Central Asia, as well as nationalism and democratization in Central Asian countries. Welcome to both of you here. I will just briefly lead you through. We'll start with some very concise questions, or rather concise answers from your side. And this is the introductory part. So maybe let's start, Dilfuza, if it's okay with you. I'd like to ask you just very briefly in a few words, could you tell us, if you had to describe, where do you see Uzbekistan's strengths at the moment and what concerns you most about your country? What would you say?
Thank you very much. Hello to everyone. Thank you for organizing this such a beautiful event and hosting us today. So in very short, what can I say is Uzbekistan is bordering with all Central Asian countries, as Dr. Simona has just recently told, including Afghanistan, which is definitely a comparative advantage of the country that yet has to be utilized. Unfortunately, we are not fully using this opportunity of being in the center of Central Asia. Another fascinating aspect is a political shift happened in 2016 and ongoing reforms in all spheres of governance in the country, including human rights and other aspects like economy, ecology, politics, and etc. For example, if we see like 5 years ago or 6 years ago, 10 years ago. So we could not even imagine that people's voice would be heard, or we would not even imagine that we will have a civic engagement space to speak freely and, you know, have such a conversation. However, I would say I see only 2 trends that bother me a lot. So one is COVID pandemic consequences that illustrated the government is still not ready to adopt evidence-based and research-based policies. This has been seen in policy making and decision making during the pandemic, for example, in terms of healthcare, and then implementation of international law, particularly International Covenant on Economic and Social Cultural Rights, in terms of limitation and derogation of human rights and human rights obligations by the country. And the second is that the government, as many other Asian and even Eastern European countries, are ready to take advantage and limit human rights. And limit human rights not according to international law, but on the benefits of their own policies and own interests. So I think this is the main things that I would say right now.
Thank you, Dilfuza. Dr. Tolipov, we all discussed this in detail, but if you only had a few words, how would you judge the current state of your country regarding society, politics, and the economy?
Yes, Simona, thank you very much for your questions. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to this event. Answering your questions in a just like a brief way, I would briefly say a few words about society, a few words about politics and economy. In terms of society, state of society, I would characterize it as quasi-modernized society because it has like a hybrid characteristics. It's a hybrid society in a sense that it demonstrates sometimes its modern characteristics, modernized more or less, and there is a big modern strata of the society. At the same time, there is a big archaic clan relations, the remnants of the archaic clan relations within the society. Depending on provinces, of course, there are different degrees of archaic clan relations between people, local residents, and so on. And at the same time, there is another feature of the society which I call Soviet legacy, or sometimes in my articles I use the word combination Soviet syndrome. It means that many aspects of the former Soviet system in social relations persist even throughout all these 30 years of independence. So this is briefly about the state of society in Uzbekistan. So again, the big strata of modernized people, the significant size of the archaic clan relationships between and among people, and the persistence of the Soviet legacy. In terms of politics, I would briefly characterize the political system of Uzbekistan as the authoritarian rule. It's of course far from being democratic, although from the beginning, when reforms in independent Uzbekistan started right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the democratic path was declared that the only way for Uzbekistan is the way to democracy. Still, throughout the entire period of independence, we see just a little, sign of democratization in a political sense. And in this sense, I think it is rather a strong authoritarian, president-centric system than liberal democracy. And again, just like the state of society here in the political sphere, I would also mention the persistence of the Soviet legacy. So what we say in our language of political scientists, the political tradition of elections, tradition of political behavior, party system, activity, everything reminds us of the recent Soviet past. So again, in the political system, again, some Soviet tradition, some remnants of the Soviet past also persist. And finally, economic system. What can I say about economy? Again, in terms of reforms, from the beginning of independence, market reforms were declared. It was so, explicit and obvious, and step-by-step market reforms are being conducted in Uzbekistan from the first day of independence. So even ideologically, the mass media propaganda in 1990s blamed the planned economy of the Soviet system, and so on and so on. And the market choice was just, obviously accepted, undeniable choice. Market reforms. I can provide numerous examples of how market reforms are being conducted, maybe later on.
Yeah, I think we'll have time.
Yeah. Also, in terms of economy, I would probably mention another interesting feature, which is quite in, unison with the modern global trends. I mean, digitalization. Especially if we understand this digitalization as the purposeful policy of the central government. So digitalization was even the name of the year last year. The year 2020 was called the year of digitalization. Thereby, the government recognized the importance, strategic expediency of digitalization of economy. So far, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have one more question, but please let me remind both of you to be a bit brief. This is just the introductory part. Dilfuza, what is the biggest misconception people have about Uzbekistan?
Perhaps I will be continuing what just Professor Tolipov said about the digitalization. So I hear many stories that telling, oh my God, you have an internet, or you have an application to register yourself, or book flights, or get the visas. So the services in Uzbekistan are becoming more digital, and I think it's also one of the reforms, or massive reforms, the ongoing reforms in Uzbekistan. And this is very good because people have access to services. I mean, citizen-centric services. It's not like because you just get it and then pay it, but because this is the government has to provide it, and it's becoming more easier. And especially it was visible during COVID, when you could also pay without non-cash payment and support families without any physical attendance. So I think that digitalization is something that most of the world maybe heard but not think that is implemented. Of course, it has to be much more development needed, especially on corruption aspect or on conflict of interest aspect. But in general, we still have it.
Okay, and just for you as well, very briefly, what do actually people have to know about you to better understand your view or your perspective on Uzbekistan, Dilfuza?
So apart from a brief introduction by you, I can say that I'm a woman from traditional society. I'm a mother of a toddler, and I'm working mom. So, and I'm also one of the youngest representative of human rights community, and I'm providing free legal consultations to people for almost 3 years. So it means that all my views, opinion, and how I look is pretty much driven from grassroots communities, and it's driven from my own experience, how it looked like to have a citizen-centric approach, or how the bottom-up initiatives are supported or not supported. So this is, for me, is important because as an activist, as a lawyer, it's important to see how the policies and law are working. And finally, I'm a legal positivist and truly believing on rule of law and justice.
Thank you very much. And before we move to the main core component of today's talk, Dr. Tolipov, some few words about you very briefly to better understand your positioning towards Uzbekistan.
If you ask about my background, my personal positions, first of all, I should say that I'm a political scientist, having a PhD degree in political science. I defended my dissertation here in Tashkent in the University of World Economy and Diplomacy, where I used to teach for 11 years. In parallel with my scientific background, I'm a teacher. As I said, I'm mostly specialized in the field of international relations. I teach international relations theory. And at the same time, I created the first, I would say proudly, think tank in Uzbekistan, which is called, as you mentioned already, Knowledge Caravan in Tashkent. I say first because it was the first independent think tank specialized in political, social issues, and working in this sphere by organizing different seminars, conferences, and publishing different materials, and also providing political consultation for the government. And finally, by my world outlook, I would perhaps say and emphasize that I'm a liberal Democrat.
Thank you very much for this. Now we move to the main part of today's conversation, and for the next 20 minutes we actually want to talk about some of the ongoing reforms in Uzbekistan, and especially on how the civil society landscape has evolved. So maybe for the public, of course, we know that the presidential transition in Uzbekistan does represent a novel development in the post-Soviet era, right? Regime insider Shavkat Mirziyoyev has actually succeeded to initiate the change without causing political destabilization. His reform program, which is aimed to liberalize the economy and society, while actually, at least so far, leaving the political system largely untouched. So, Dilfuza, the first question for you, the new course under President Mirziyoyev, this is a question that was also asked by one of the two speakers last time for you, is often referred to as a quiet revolution or a revolution from above. What does that mean? Can you tell us, Dilfuza?
Thank you very much. It's an interesting question to think about. I think it's mostly because all reforms that has been done after 2016 has been successfully needed, timely, and it was, as you said, without any tragedy or, let's say, any disturbances or social disturbances. If we talk about the economy or, let's say, the currency liberalization, so we everyone knew that in Uzbekistan there are two courses, like black market and currency exchange in the banks. So it was almost impossible to go and freely exchange the money. And it was also concerning the monopoly, unhealthy monopoly that is ongoing in Uzbekistan, especially on the car industry. So, for example, if you want to buy a car, I'm talking about the story before 2016. So if you want to buy a car, you go and get the price in sums, but then the seller will transfer you into dollars by bank course. Of course, as ordinary citizen, you could not go to bank and buy the dollars. So you had to go to black market and buy it in twice, and then bring dollars to the bank. So you see how the monopoly and the corruption was so much justified by the country. And of course, it was visible corruption scheme, because you could not even question it, otherwise you would not get any car. So then in 2016 and 17, when there was a rumors and then, spreading the words that there will be change and reform in the currency system, no one even believed and said, no, it would not happen, because for 20 years already we had this system. And then in one day, we see that the currency exchange has been just unified, and then there was a struggle, and there was not even disturbances within the this scheme, because it's not only one person who is doing, but it's systematic issue. And then we also saw that president started talking with people. I mean, he established this virtual reception of the president that not even people was imagining that you can just call the president's office and then complain on that. I mean, this was something booming, and of course, it became a bridge, or building the trust between the government and people. I think this was very smart move when the president or authority is showing that, okay, I'm a different from previous president or previous governor, but at the same time to showing the respect, because he used to be a prime minister for 13 years, and then he was a mayor, and then took another different roles in the government. Of course, he could not blame the previous system, because he was was a part of that. So I think it was a smart move to illustrate that he's trusting the people, and he needs people's voice. And then this civic engagement mechanisms has enlarged. And another thing is, for example, public advisory councils. We see that now each government organization has to have a public advisory council, which is recommendation body, but still you can include ordinary citizens or experts in the field who can recommend in the policies to the governance. Let's say the anti-corruption agency, and then they have this advisory council who include independent experts who can be foreigners or Uzbek nationalities. So I think it's also a good initiative. But on other hand, we see that everything is top to down. Everything that the government has to say first, it should be a presidential decree or law or order, and then it's implemented in the grassroots. Of course, this is a question how it comes to the grassroots level, because in my field trips, for example, I see that NGOs are going to Hakimiyat and demanding for some certain things, for example, financial assets or providing a place to stay. And then they say, okay, we don't have it. So maybe it's somewhere stuck in government, it's stuck in the ministries, it's stuck in Tashkent city, in the capital, and it's stuck maybe in central cities of the all regions, but not goes very top to down. And then the second aspect is about the top to down, bottom up approach. So we don't see that any initiative has been brought from the grassroots was actually delivered to the top, and then they would be listening what is going on. Of course, mass media plays the greater role. If we talk about how they push it, we can take the example of Soch region. Last year, we had a tension between the border between Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. This is an enclave, and it was a very big tension and challenge and conflict. And then 22 people were in court for unjustified reasons. And then all this pressure in the mass media, in civil society, human rights community, I think it was also one of the push factors to adopt the final decision. And as final decision, only 5 people were charged with administrative and criminal punishment, while the rest of them, they were released from the court. Of course, we cannot say that this is ideal judiciary system or ideal mechanism how it should work, but I think this is first steps to come out from oppression and from totalitarian, let's say, situation that we used to have for quite a long time.
Thank you very much. And queuing on what you just said, Dr. Tolipov, in an interview with The Diplomat, you said that despite obvious advancements in reforms in various spheres, one direction of reforms remains quite slow in Uzbekistan, and that is the sphere of political reform. So my question for you deals with the upcoming presidential elections in October 2021. What advancements and developments do you expect in the political reform sphere? And connected to that, maybe does actually President Mirziyoyev face any serious political challengers?
Yes. I think when we try to explain and describe political reforms in Uzbekistan, probably I would refrain from using the phrase which you, Simone, said, quiet revolution. For me, my personal impression is it's maybe one simple word can well describe the ongoing political reforms, and not only political, overall reforms under the presidency of Mirziyoyev. This word is more. I think if we compare President Mirziyoyev with his predecessor, we can say that he is more reformist than Karimov. He is more reform-oriented than Karimov. He is more democratic and liberal than Karimov. That's it. So I mean by this, just this slight shift from the numerous restrictions in freedoms and rights of the previous period towards more liberal life, but only a slight shift, no more. I think there is much to do, to create real democratic system. And coming back to political reforms, first of all, I should say that I do not expect, some surprises this year in the presidential election campaign, and I expect that the incumbent Mirziyoyev will be re-elected for the second term. So this is not a surprise. This is what everybody expects this year. For me, the most important issue is what will happen next time. I mean, when the next presidential campaign, presidential elections come in 5 years, whether President Mirziyoyev will be nominated for the third term or not. This is more important. In order to be better prepared for the third term or for the next presidential election, I think the key issue for us is political reforms. Unfortunately, political reforms are not so easy, especially when it comes to political actors, when it comes to political pluralism in the society, political struggle of different actors. Take, for instance, political parties. They are, all of them are very loyal to the government. We have no political opposition to the government, no opposition party. Any attempt to create such an opposition party are blocked in Uzbekistan, unfortunately. But nevertheless, with all these problems, so far, I don't see actually any, popular and well-deserving political figure in Uzbekistan who would be really a strong man or woman to challenge the positions of the government, challenge the positions of the president even, to demonstrate that he is really a new leader, a new person, and so on and so on. So by summarizing, I would perhaps say that no surprise this year, but for the next presidential elections in 5 years, to come in 5 years, the central problem which president will be facing is to launch, to activate political reforms.
Thank you very much. Now, let's talk a bit more in detail about the evolvement of the civil society landscape by looking at the cotton industry, one of your key industries in Uzbekistan. Now, this industry we know has traditionally been controlled by the state, and what many people perhaps don't know is that during harvest times, about 2 million people were involved in picking cotton. And many of those individuals actually were forced to labor in the fields, receiving little or no pay. So things have changed in 2016. I would like to ask Dilfuza, since you were also involved in this, during the cotton harvest 2016-2020, so after, of course, the former president passing, you worked for a project of the International Labour Organization in Uzbekistan covering labor rights and feedback mechanisms. Could you first maybe give us some background information on the evolvement and the changes in the harvesting process, the amelioration for people after 2016?
So I think we should first start saying that the first issue that we had before 2016, because after not 16 but maybe 17 was turning point of eradicating child and forced labor in Uzbekistan. So before that, we had a big issues on child and forced labor in the country, and it was also connected with not only payments or forcing them to work, but also it was about the protection of victims and confidence building. So meaning that people could not be sure that if they complain, they would be safe. And if they even complain and there will be a guarantee, there is no, let's say, a protection or legal remedies to go forward and then demand for their rights. So this was the main challenges why people keep silent, why people could not even call, or why people even don't trust the government when they say, okay, forced labor is prohibited. I mean, this prohibition was in the labor court from 1994, but no one even questioned that this can be a right. So this was the main big questions and issues. And then, after 2013, human rights activists movement around Uzbekistan and abroad and pushing this agenda, then the third-party monitoring project was implemented by multilateral donors in the country. It was not only ILO, but it was also financial institutions, embassies, and then international organizations. So then this movement has started, which included independent monitoring groups, which was consisted of human rights activists, human rights defenders, human rights lawyers. So I think it was important thing that this group of activists could even go without the government officials and then check if in the fields there are people, children or people without payment and contracts and etc. In 2017, when President Mirziyoyev visited UN General Assembly, then there was a turning point when on the stage he said, like, we have to stop child labor. There will be no child labor. And then this was the end of the child labor in the country, I would say. And this was admitted by many other countries as well. Later, we see that there were huge work on eradicating forced labor. So now we can say that there is no systematic forced labor. Of course, there are cases of forced labor in the country, but then we don't see it's a system base. We don't see that hakimiyats or mahallas are mobilizing people for picking the cotton. It's just voluntary based. And it's also connected not only with this political will, but also other reforms. First is, of course, about the introduction of cluster system in the country. Now we have a clusters where business people or clusters, they are doing themselves, like they're doing the fields and then mobilizing people, paying them, and etc. Then we have agricultural reforms that going on, and it concerning the land diversification as well, where now the cotton fields are shrinking, and then more fields are devoted to wheats, and then for gardening and other products, agricultural products, and also involvement of foreign investors. We see that Turkish and American, European investors are coming in agricultural field, and they try to make businesses there. So we see that now the policy, agricultural policy, is not concerned only on the cotton, but it's also concerning other fields in agriculture. That this, I think, it was also one of the pushing points why it became easier to eradicate forced labor. Of course, now it's a question of forced labor, not in cotton field, but in general in the country, because we have forced labor in other spheres as well, including public policy, public service. So if we again come back to the feedback mechanism, what I did and within the project, my role was this making sure that there is a transparent, independent, and trustworthy mechanism, complaint mechanism, where cotton pickers whose rights are violated could call and would be safe from further investigation, from further surveillance, and their cases will be resolved according to law. So I think we could succeed it. And I see throughout my involvement for years that people are complaining more and more. And if the 5 years ago complaint was only about the forced labor, now more complaints about the payments, like not on time, or hot water is not provided, food is not provided, and such. So it's not all about forced labor, and it's not all about the payment and etc. But it's more about the technicalities, let's say. So this is the point from my side.
Thank you. So sort of complaints that make you understand that the situation has indeed improved, right? Otherwise, they would be more serious. And that's what you meant. Thank you. So looking back and forward, like for 1,000 years, we know that this landlocked region was actually a hub of trade and transformation. It was in Tashkent, in Samarkand, Bukhara, and in the Fergana Valley that the Silk Road grew from a simple trading route into a place that actually captured the world's imagination, right? Early openness to trade allowed cities to flourish, and of course, leading scientists, craftsmen, poets, and musicians to call this their home. So looking to the past and applying that past to our situation nowadays, Dr. Tolipov, may I ask you, to what extent are these ancient trading routes still relevant, and what does Uzbekistan, for example, expect from the modern Silk Road? I'm talking about China's Belt and Road Initiative. Could you maybe say something about BRI projects in Uzbekistan or Uzbekistan's role in this?
Yes, very interesting question. First of all, for those who are interested in the revitalization of the Great Silk Road, ancient Great Silk Road in a modern form, I would highly recommend to read the book, a very famous bestseller written by British professor Peter Frankopan. The title of his book is New Silk Roads, in plural, not one single Silk Road, but in plural, single Silk Roads, in which he well described the evolution, the rise of Silk Road, and its the decline and revitalization in modern time. And one of his central, conclusions which he made in the end of the book, deserving quotation, is that the area which once centuries ago was at the center of Great Silk Road and affected immensely to the development and the dynamics of the Great Silk Road, now is again rising and becoming again the central part of the modern Silk Road, and this is Central Asia, he said. And I agree to a great extent with his conclusion that Central Asia now is becoming really visible in the global system, and especially taking into account that all Central Asian countries, and of course primarily I would say Uzbekistan, are dealing with the issue of diversification and creation of different transport corridors stretching across Central Asia, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. Well, and I can provide numerous examples of how new railroads, avenues, highways were created, in particular by Uzbekistan, through stretching through Iran, through Caucasus region, through Afghanistan, and one of the most discussed and most attractive project today is what you mentioned yourself, Simona, BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. The initiative, which was advanced in 2013 by the current leader of China, Xi Jinping. and it's quite comprehensive project. It includes, millions of different other sub-projects in the sphere of transport, in the sphere of gas pipelines, oil pipelines, railroads, hubs, infrastructure, logistics, and not only these kind of things. I mean, projects in the sphere of economy, trade, and the like. But also, BRI today is interpreted by many experts as ambitious projects on the part of China to, project its soft power as well. So within the framework of BRI, numerous humanitarian projects are also discussed, such as cultural issues, language issues, providing stipends and scholarships to local students to study in Chinese, leading Chinese universities, creation of so-called Confucian institutes in Central Asian countries. We have in Uzbekistan 2 Confucian schools in Tashkent and in Samarkand, and so on and so on. So BRI is really a comprehensive and ambitious project. Currently, Uzbekistan is very much interested in opening the shortest way to the southern ports in the Indian Ocean. And one of the most actual topic today, which is discussed by the government, by officials and experts, is the creation of the railroads and highway from Central Asia through Afghanistan, cities such as Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan, Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, to Peshawar, and further on to Indian Ocean, to Pakistani ports, and then to India. This is really a very ambitious project which Uzbekistan now is advancing. Even this year in summer, very soon in a month, we will be hosting a big international official conference under the title Central Asia, South Asia Connectivity. So from this short example, you can see how Uzbekistan, and alongside other Central Asian countries, is so concerned about diversification of transport and trade corridors from Central Asia, in particular from Uzbekistan, to international markets. So this is also so illustrative of the revitalization of what we call ancient Great Silk Road. This, by the way, this phrase, Silk Road, is really so fashionable today in the language of experts and ordinary people as well. Officials also very often reiterate Great Silk Road, Great Silk Road. So actual, so fashionable this word became, by thereby recognizing that Central Asia now can become visible in the international arena, and also be take advantage of its geographical location as the transit route, the transit area for different traders coming from China to the West, and from Europe to China and Japan, and along the north-south route as well.
Thank you very much. Actually, there is a very good question that just came in, because we are slowly nearing, I have more questions, but we're slowly nearing the part of the discussion in which I now have to open the floor to the discussions. And one question I wanted to ask is very similar to what somebody just asked, and it is, you mentioned just now, of course, the role of China and the influence that China also has, also through its cultural sphere, talking about, for example, the Confucius Institute. This is something that we feel actually very strongly also in the West, and particularly Switzerland also has just recently released a new China strategy, the government has, in order to deal better with China in a more coordinated fashion. So I could imagine, and I think this goes sort of along in the direction of what the public wants to ask, what this person wants to ask, that this can also provoke sort of frictions with Russia. I mean, after all, Uzbekistan was previously in the Soviet Union. Could you maybe say something about that, the role of Russia and China in Uzbekistan?
Indeed, there is implicit or explicit tension, sometimes very acute, sometimes soft tension, or contradiction between interests of Russia and interests of China in the area of Central Asia. One example to demonstrate such a tension, or let's say competition between Russian and Chinese interests in Central Asia, is the attempt on the part of Russia to, create and develop so-called Eurasian Economic Union. So far, this is a very small group of former Soviet republics, members of the EAEU, Eurasian Economic Union, Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Armenia and Kyrgyzstan. Two Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, are the members of the EAEU, and Uzbekistan became an observer, got an observer status in December last year. So today, one of the most debated actual issue is whether Uzbekistan will one day become the full-fledged member of the EAEU. But regardless of this issue, I think there is, let's say, incompatibility to some extent between EAEU and the BRI. It's not by accident that some years ago, couple of years ago, President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, proposed the concept of connectivity between EAEU and BRI. How this connectivity can be established between Eurasia and China within the BRI project is an open question, because within the Eurasian Economic Union there is a custom union, like substructure of the EAEU, custom union, which was established in particular to prevent smuggling of goods coming from China and then moving across Central Asian region to Russia and further on. That's why there is, at least this example also illustrates some possible contradictions and incompatibility between EAEU and BRI in terms of connectivity. So this is a small example to illustrate that Russia's and Chinese interests are not so much harmonious in Central Asia. And also there are many other examples which demonstrate such incompatibility and clash of interests.
Thank you very much. I have a second question. I don't know if Dilfuza, you would like to try to give it a try, or maybe Dr. Tolipov. The question would be talking about the collapse of tourism industry in Uzbekistan, and how is that actually affecting Uzbekistan, and what are the plans for the future on that?
Yeah, the COVID, of course, definitely hit the tourism, but I would not say that tourism was one of the greatest potential that we could utilize fully, because only a couple of years ago there was a start of tourism industry in the country because of the visa restrictions. So that it was almost impossible to get any visa in Uzbekistan. But then starting from 2017 and 18, we had enormous number of countries who would travel to Uzbekistan without visas, and they can come. And then there was also good policy for the registration. As you know, we used to have a registration in the country which was devoted, which was almost impossible to work in other regions even, or receive any services. I'm not talking about leaving. So that's why for foreigners it was almost impossible to stay, for example, backpack travelers, or to stay in the guests in friends' houses. So you had to go to Ovir or police station and then get the registration. Now it's much more easier. You can do it online yourself. You can apply, or don't even apply, just come to Uzbekistan and of course travel around the country. Another thing that Uzbekistan started doing on tourism, it was the connectivity between the regions, because what we used to have, it was only connectivity between Tashkent and regions. So only from Tashkent you can fly to different regions, while now you have flights to popular destinations like Khiva, Bukhara, and Samarkand. I mean, between each other you can travel. So it's also very convenient for travelers who are coming for 1 week, for example, and etc. Of course, COVID hit a lot because of the restrictions, not only from Uzbekistan, but also restrictions from other countries, because it's not concerning coming to Uzbekistan and traveling, but also when you're leaving, then you have to, in your home country, be in quarantine or be quarantined in Uzbekistan if it's a red zone of the countries. So now I know that there are certain policies, including specific packages for tourists, which is covering COVID treatment in a country or treatment in abroad, and then insurance companies are paying. There's also a specific tours, local tours, for example, exploring your region, and tourism agency started from this year promoting internal tourism also for Uzbek citizens themselves, because we have many citizens who have never been to, for example, Hiva or Bukhara or let's say Fergana Valley. So I think when the restrictions will be out, not only in Uzbekistan but in the rest of the world, and after the vaccination of majority of people, I think it will be much more better. But also this time is ideal. I mean, I would say theoretically ideal for a tourism committee to think about evidence-based and research-based decision-making, not just having profit-based policies, but also to think what would be the best to promote Uzbek culture, Uzbek language, traditions, and get the most benefit out of tourism and utilize this potential.
Thank you. We are running out of time, but I think there's time for a quick question for Dr. Tolipov from the public. How do you assess the opportunity of relocation of US bases to Central Asia, Uzbekistan, and how it can affect relations with Uzbekistan's two largest trade partners?
Yeah, a very actual question today. For those who are interested in some details and deepen into the question, I can share my interviews and my articles, which are already published in different internet sources and in journals as well, in different languages, for those who are interested. Briefly, I can only say that, first of all, we should make difference between what we call de jure and de facto. De jure, we have the defense doctrine and the concept of foreign policy of Uzbekistan, which includes the provision, the principle that Uzbekistan doesn't provide its territory for deployment of military contingents to any foreign country. So it means that Uzbekistan pursues no base policy, no base in the territory of Uzbekistan. Many refer to such provision of these documents to explain the perspectives of redeployment of American contingents in the territory of Uzbekistan. But from other point of view, on the contrary, me personally, I believe that it's actually possible, even without contradiction with the de jure aspects of the issue. What I mean, much depends on how we interpret this relocation of American base. First of all, we already had such an experience of cooperation with the United States, which some years ago, I mean, since 2001 until 2005, within 5 years, already deployed its short air base in the south of Uzbekistan. This air base conducted the operations in Afghanistan, flying from territory of Uzbekistan to Afghanistan. The same experience can be continued or repeated. I mean, but today we read a lot of, let's say, information attacks mostly from Russia, whose experts and even officials express their concern about such a perspective that Uzbekistan would allow the United States to deploy some contingents on its territory. So I think this is a geopolitical question. So far, in my discussions, debates with Russian colleagues, I couldn't find any convincing arguments why Russia is against such a deployment of American base. I do not call it a base. Should it be deployed in Uzbekistan, it can be named not a base, because base is different, but a small contingent with very limited functions, limited tasks, which should be agreed upon with special agreements and publicized. Then there will be no contradiction to Russian interests or Chinese interests regarding this issue. But again, this is a very complex issue, and we have to, consider it in a broader perspective.
Well, be sure to make your interviews available to the public. We have another question, but then we have to, Dilfuza, it's for you. Could you try to be a bit brief about this? Because then I have a few standard questions and then we have to end. A very good question. The European Union has provided millions of euros of aid and support to Uzbekistan through EIB as well as trade preferences. Is that making any difference to the economy and the life of ordinary Uzbeks?
Thank you. I think it's definitely made an impact, because I used to work for one of the projects, very beautiful projects on promotion of economic, cultural, and social and cultural rights in Uzbekistan. So in the judiciary sector, I think it was very good, because another projects that the European Union is supporting on civil society. If we talk about people, then we have to talk about civil society as well. So these projects are tackling specific issues, including gender-based violence, then agriculture, trade unions. They also invest into cotton harvest projects. So I think they do make small changes. Of course, not maybe as big, as much as we want to, but I think little but it's good. And another question was about the preferences. So you know that only in April 2021 Uzbekistan received the GSP plus status, so it means that it's still something new for us, and Uzbek companies and businesses are still not familiar with the GSP plus status and what the preferences can be given to them. So I think now it's a stage when Chamber of Commerce, Ministry of Economy and Trade and Investment, they have to now promote more and more that there is an opportunity for European markets to be presented by Uzbek goods. But also it's related to certification. As you know, that it's very hard to get let's say green or ecology certificates to import agricultural goods, because Uzbekistan is famous with agricultural goods and agricultural products. So I think now we have to, Uzbekistan has to work more about certification, issuing the certificates by trustworthy companies, because we have hundreds of certificate companies, but they are not certified worldwide themselves. So it also brings a shadow on these documents by European importers. So that's why I think GSP Plus is something unknown for now, and it has full potential to create the bridge between Uzbek and European vendors, companies, and a trade. So I think it's a great opportunity, and I think that these will be growing when there will be a certificate, when businesses will get familiar in Uzbekistan what is and how to export, and when the COVID restrictions will be taken out.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, we are unfortunately nearing the end of this conversation. You both did a wonderful job in outlining complicated issues dealing with geopolitics, the evolution of Uzbekistan since 2016, and the role of civil society and recent changes. Let me just bring in some final standardized, very easy questions, which will allow us to end on a slightly lighter note. For both of you, and please just name us one place and one dish. If we are finally allowed after the pandemic to travel to Uzbekistan again, what is the one place you'd recommend that we visit, both of you, and what is the one dish you'd recommend that we would try? Dilfuza.
Since I do not eat red meat, so I cannot say that this is samsa, but definitely plov. But what I love from my side, it will be green dumplings. Mm-hmm. So it's dumplings with the green, and it's now it's a season. So please try it when you come during the spring. And one place, my favorite place, is Khiva. It's an ancient city. It's something completely different from Samarkand and Bukhara. It has something different, spirit, history, and then beauty. So, great. And it's also a clash between, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and it's something unique, and they have their own language, dish, and etc. So I would say Khiva.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Dr. Tolipov, what about you?
Yeah, of course, if you ask Uzbeks about his or her favorite dish, he and she would immediately say pilav. But I would like to be original right now, and I would highly recommend to try Uzbek melons and watermelons. They are of such size, biggest in the world maybe, and the sweetest in the world. So try watermelons and melons in Uzbekistan when you come, if you come in summertime. And regarding the cities, yes, we can mention Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, but come to Tashkent, to the capital, and visit two places in Tashkent, in in the capital, big bazaars, food bazaars, and what is highly recommended, Tashkent Metro. You will see very beautiful tunnels, stations in metro of Uzbekistan, probably without exaggeration and subjective assessments, one of the most beautiful metro in the world. Especially go to the station called Space, Cosmos. You will see, you will find yourself in Cosmos.
I read about that. It must be
Okay.
very interesting. Now,
Okay.
before we close here, would you actually have a question? You know, in 2 weeks, we have another episode of a closer look, and it will be on the Sultanate of Brunei. Is there something you'd like to ask to the two speakers of the episode on Sultanate of Brunei?
If I may, I would be very much interested, since you have both speakers, one from the parliament and the second from agricultural sector, and then taking into consideration political and economic constraints and situation they have, I would ask about the civil society and say, what is the role of civil society in driving these reforms? This would be interesting to see from perspective of the government and from perspective of the business.
That's great. Great question. What about you, Dr. Tolipov? Would you also have a question for them?
As I said in the beginning of our conversation, I'm a teacher. And among other things, I teach the very special discipline, which is titled Developing World Countries. And I'm very much interested in some specific features of countries which used to be portrayed as developing third world countries. And some observers, some scientists also portray Uzbekistan as a third world country, although I'm not, I disagree with such description. Anyway, regarding Brunei, maybe I would ask them about how they evaluate the path, the strategic goal of development of this country, which peculiarities of the country, be them social, political, or economic, demonstrate the dynamics, very specific features of the development of Brunei, to say that Brunei is becoming more developed, stronger, and so on. Because when we talk about East Asian, Southeast Asian countries, we very often use very special symbolical word miracle, or tigers, East Asian tigers. So can Brunei also, consider itself, or position itself as the new tiger or miracle of the East? This would be very
excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Excellent. We will keep that in mind, both of your questions. Once again, I'm sorry I have to cut this short, but we are coming to an end. Thank you both so much, Dr. Farkhod Tolipov and Dilfuza Kurolova, for these great insights. And thanks to all of you who joined us for this great episode today and for the excellent questions, making the discussion even more lively. Now, our next episode, as I mentioned before, will be on June 3rd on the Sultanate of Brunei. And we do hope that all of you shall join us for that as well. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for being with us today.